series of roll up our sleeves days, right? We've not been together since, as an entire group, since before the June 11th presentation of your work, the 90-day report to the County Board of Supervisors. For those of you that had the opportunity to attend, and for those who didn't, that presentation went very well. The report was well received by the board and with a show of support, I would say. That was preceded by a wonderfully supportive editorial from the LA Times suggesting to the Board of Supervisors that our report be taken, be received well. So I think that the show of support from the audience, the presentations, the questions and answers between the board and members of the ATI group, as well as some of the department heads, all of that really went quite well. So a round of appreciation for everyone whose fingerprints were on that process. Thank you. And that was the easy lap. That was the easy lap, okay, compared to what's in front of us now. We now officially enter phase 2. Phase one being getting to the Department Board with the 90-day report. Phase 2 is how we turn this basket of more than 140 recommendations for action into something that feels more like an action-oriented implementation plan for the County Board of Supervisors before this year comes to an end. So what you're going to hear from Rigo and the team today is sort of what that looks like and what's to be expected and how we begin to turn the 90-day report into an implementation plan. As another show of support for the work of the ATI, there was a motion approved by the Board of Supervisors in the week or two following our presentation, might have been in the middle of a budget, in the context of a budget hearing, that set up a sort of reserve fund to support some of the implementation recommendations of the ATIs. And I think that was a way of the Board of Supervisors saying yes, and we're going to take this seriously and meaningfully and begin to set aside some resources to support the implementation of some of the recommendations. So that's how I received that. And if I mistakenly received that or interpreted that some way, please don't correct me. I'd rather feel like that was a show of support, and I think it was. The last thing I'll say, I just want to mention that I was invited to do a site visit in Brooklyn about a month ago, and there was a contingent of LA County representatives on the trip, some from Sheriff and Public Defender's Office and others. And we visited the Red Hook Community Justice Center in Brooklyn, which really, for me, spoke to not just incremental reform, but what radical reimagination can look like at the community level. So this was a courthouse that was in a community, in a neighborhood. Okay, so imagine just dropping a courthouse into Boyle Heights, for example, that doesn't look like a courthouse from the outside. It looks like a community facility, community building. It reminded me in its look of those of you familiar with the Community Coalition's offices in South Los Angeles. It kind of had that kind of community feel to it, or community look to it. The courtroom in that Community Justice Center looked like a room like this, with windows and white walls, a judge who was sitting at a desk that was not way up high, but level with the folks that were in the community. There was a desk for the defendant and the public defender, and there was a desk for the district attorney, and then there was a navigator bouncing back and forth among the defendant and the judge, working deals about making sure that that person got connected to services. we had an opportunity to sit through watching the judge adjudicate maybe 7 or 8 cases that morning. In fact, Brett Taylor from CCI was part of the team that helped organize that site visit. Thank you guys for doing that. But unless I'm mistaken, Brett, not one of those cases went to jail. They got sentenced to support. They got sentenced to peacekeeping services or peacemaking services. Upstairs, there were navigation services for mental health and substance abuse and GED supports and even job training, peacekeeping and mediation supports. The only way you could tell that that facility was a courthouse was at the very front of the building. There were a couple of police officers and a metal detector you had to walk through, but other than that, you could not recognize that this building had anything to do with incarceration or jail. It really was a community justice center, and justice defined as making sure that people get the kind of services they need. This population was all misdemeanors, I believe. I believe they're now beginning to graduate towards felonies. But again, a reimagining of what community justice can look like in real time. And so I was inspired by that visit, further inspired by many of the ideas that you guys put on the table in the report. Some of the ideas are incremental and fall in the category of incremental reform. Some of the ideas are more radical reimagination of what's possible in this county. So that was a nice way of certainly stoking my own fires about feeling good about the work of this group. And all I can say to you is keep pushing. We want radical reimagination and creativity and not just opportunities for incremental reform. So with that, Rigo, take us home.
Thank you, Dr. Raz. Glad to know that you're coming back all fired up. So let's do this. Let's complete the introductions. If I go to your table, just raise your hand if you haven't yet introduced yourself.